about burnout? I know people usually say to start with the good news before the bad news, but I wanted to kick off the Road to Tech series with Interview Burnout because it is really, really important that I do. There's a lot of resources and tips out there for how to prepare for a technical interview, but rarely do anyone actually touch upon the very real thing, which is interview burnout. I have been there, many of my friends have been there, and many of the software engineers who are more senior than me that I look up to have also been there. The nightmare stories of having a 5-hour gruesome interview where you're coding on a whiteboard in front of people you've just literally met, asking you to implement a vending machine in C++ like right now with like no Google, no Stack Overflow available to you. That kind of stress repeated over time will undoubtedly have some sort of negative effect on you. And that's pretty much what interview burnout is. But I like to refer to the World Health Organization for an official definition of what burnout is. Burnout is officially classified as an occupational phenomenon in 2019. It's a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It's characterized by 3 main dimensions. 1. Exhaustion and depletion of energy. 2. Increased mental distance from one's job, or negativity or cynicism towards one's job. 3. Reduced professional efficacy. So how does this relate to interview burnout? Interview burnout is when you know that interviewing is what you have to do in order to get that job, but it's also the last thing that you want to do. You know that you should be doing lead code right now, but that's the last thing that you want to do. You know that you should be practicing some behavioral questions, but that's really the last thing that you do. And you default to Netflix and chill, or you play Animal Crossing, or you pretend to do chores, but you're actually just thinking about playing Animal Crossing and watching Netflix. Interview burnout happens when you've just had so many interviews and so much interview prep that you literally cannot stand the thought of yet another interview. But you know in your heart of hearts that that's really the only way you're going to get a job. I'm not claiming to be an expert in burnout, but I've had a lot of it in the past, especially in college when I was just grinding it out and trying to find my very first internship. I probably made all of the mistakes. And so I really want to share with you 7 different ways that you can avoid burnout so that you can keep performing and showing up at interviews your very best. Number 1, be choosy about who you're interviewing. I know this feels counterintuitive because everybody says it's a numbers game. The more applications you put out, the more chances you are of hearing back and getting an interview. It's ultimately detrimental to you and it's not sustainable. When you are a student looking for your very first internship, you're probably going to want to cast a wide net because you don't really know what you want. You're not really sure what you're looking for. But the more seasoned you are and the more interviews you get, the more experience you have, you'll be able to determine for yourself what sort of company you want to go for, what sort of role, what function. You'll be able to judge job descriptions based on your criteria that's calibrated to your needs and wants. So if you know all of that, you shouldn't be wasting your time interviewing for a company that you didn't like in the first place. If you get the job, you might stay there 1, 2 months, 6 months, but feel really, really tired and have to go through the interview process yet again. It's also tempting to look at these as extra interview practice, but I really implore you to not go that route. You're wasting the company's resources and you're wasting your mental and emotional health. If you're looking for interview practice, I suggest using sites like prompt.com where you can be paired with somebody in a similar boat to practice interviews with. Number 2, designate off hours and days off from interviewing. Like how that one adage goes, job hunting is basically a job itself. So like a job, you should really be focusing on giving yourself days off from it. For me personally, I made a rule to only interview Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings so that Tuesday and Thursday mornings are always going to be mine. I've also made it a rule to not have any interview prep done on Saturdays because I don't really have anything upcoming, and all of my interview prep will be done Sunday afternoon or late Sunday night after I've already had my fun weekend. This really helps me refresh and re-energize over the weekend, and it also gives me clear boundaries so that I don't feel guilty about watching Netflix or hanging out with friends when I think that I should be doing coding or lead code or practicing interviews. By separating out when I'll be doing interviews and when I'll be doing interview prep, I am basically giving myself a routine and a schedule that can align better to my lifestyle. Number 3, do not neglect your health. Speaking of lifestyles, you should always have a very good lifestyle that you're following, especially when you're interviewing, because you need to be at your very best. You are already mentally, emotionally, and physically strained when you're doing these interviews, especially when you're doing on-sites. Even though everything's kind of virtual right now because of Corona, you're still having to think through for maybe 5 hours in a day, back-to-back interviews with those folks. So it's really important for you to have the right rest, the right sleep, and the right food, and the right exercise. There's lots of studies that prove that having consistent exercise really helps with your mental clarity. So I highly suggest putting in some 20 minutes in your day. And trust me when I say that I used to hate running, but once I realized that going on a treadmill allows me to basically work off all of my inner frustrations about not getting that one job that I feel like I should have gotten, you're gonna love exercising just as much as I do. Or maybe that's just me and my vengeful spirit coming out to play on the treadmill because I know no one can get hurt. Number 4, use sites and services like Hired, Vettery, and TripleByte, where employers seek out job candidate profiles. This ultimately helps reduce your workload and the things that you have to worry about because companies are looking for your profile in those sites rather than you looking for those job postings in sites like LinkedIn and Indeed. This really helps streamline your process so that you can just focus on interviewing and prepping. I'm not saying to totally not apply to jobs, but this definitely helps alleviate some of that stress. Number 5, don't take the rejection personally. I know that this is a lot easier said than done, but I've tried to do my very best to not think of the rejection as a reflection upon my character and my skill, but just the reflection of the circumstances that surround it. Maybe there is a candidate with much more experience in a specific bracket that I just don't have enough experience with. These are the kinds of things that you'll hear from a feedback if you ask for it from a recruiter. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I've always asked for a feedback after my interview, regardless of how it turned out. And I've pretty much only gotten maybe a 20% acceptance rate or success rate of getting actual feedback. In those situations, it's because I've built up a relationship with the recruiter where I've established that our interests are aligned. They want to recruit me into the company, I want to go into the company. So, do your best, befriend your recruiter, and ask for feedback. Number 6. Break down your goal of getting hired into mini goals that will help you gain momentum. If your only goal is to get hired and that's the only thing that you're working towards, then it's obviously going to get very tiring very fast if you're just interviewing and not reaching your goal. Instead of doing that, why don't you break it up into different tasks? Like maybe I will craft 4 specific resumes for these 4 specialties that I want to take on, or I will write 2 good cover letters that I can use as a template for all of my other cover letters, or I'll reach out to this person for informational interview by this date. So having those little tasks and side quests almost will help fuel you to get stronger and feel good about the process. Number 7 relates to number 6, which is to recognize and reward your small wins. Like I said, it's going to get very painful very fast if your goal and your only measure of your goal is to get hired and you haven't been hired. I know folks who had a really great college career and then couldn't get a job post-grad for months, almost a year out, because the circumstances were just not right for them. but they were able to push forward because they were celebrating the small wins that they were getting. They celebrated whenever they got a call back finally from a recruiter. They celebrated when they made it to an on-site. They celebrated when they hit 50 resume variations. So figure out what is it that you can be happy about of where you are right now, and let that fuel you to keep going and reach your goal of getting hired. And that's it. That's all I have to say for this very first episode of Road to Tech. Thank you for tuning into my channel. My name is MEE-sha. I'll see you next Thursday. Bye!
Just put it on like here and I'll go like...
Let's talk about burnout.